Good morning, everyone. I take my mask off, so I'm 6 feet away from, at least 6 feet away from Shannon, who's taping this. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the holiday season. You know, when I came into the office this morning, I looked out my window, and it was cold, snowy, gray. It reminded me of a morning a long, long time ago, Christmas Eve, many, many years ago. And I was at our office at the corner of Craig and Baird, now called Howard Hanna Way, our first and only office at the time. And one thing I did in those days is I took opportunity time as many times as I could. Now, we only had 5 or 6 agents, so it was easy to volunteer for opportunity time. But I always found it a great way to get new leads. So I'm on opportunity time about 10:30 in the morning, and I get a call from Mr. Maurice T. Fountain. Mr. Fountain worked at the J&L steel plant in Hazelwood. Now, steel, for most of you people know what steel is, it was a hard surface metal that was made throughout the tri-state and Lake Erie region and over the lakes in Buffalo and around and Pittsburgh and Cleveland, all these great places. That was our main staple of a business, was making steel. Now, Mr. Fountain informed me that he had just been promoted to a superintendent at the Jones and Laughlin steel plant in Hazelwood, as I mentioned. And he said to me, he said, Mr. Hanna, he says, I've always admired a house at the corner of Elizabeth and Johnson towards the top of the hill in Hazelwood. And that he wanted to take a look at the house with his family later that afternoon because he wanted to buy a home for his family for Christmas. The ultimate Christmas gift is a new home. Remember that. And that's the business we're in. The ultimate holiday gift in the upcoming month is a holiday gift of a new home for your family. Now, Mr. Fountain wanted to look at the house at 2 o'clock when he got off his work at the mill. And so he always admired this house because he lived in the top of the hill over the mountain and in a place called the Glen Hazel Projects. Okay? And he passed the house every day, so he always admired this house. So I got off the phone with him, and I said I would meet him. When I was on the phone, I would meet him at around 2 o'clock in front of the house. I called the sellers, Mr. and Mrs. Karapopoulos. And Mr. and Mrs. Karapopoulos had purchased a house in Baldwin across the Monongahela River in a suburb called Baldwin earlier that summer when I was home from college. So I called Mr. and Mrs. Karapopoulos, talked to Mrs. Karapopoulos, reintroduced myself to her because I had been away for 4 months at college and really maybe wasn't enough contact with her. So you always got to stay in contact with your sellers. Now, Mrs. Karapopoulos was a little bit, surprised I was calling, and I had to remind her that my name was on the sign on her house. In those days, this was an Insel brick house, and we had roofer's nails, and we tacked the sign onto the house. And so it was there, I knew it was there, so just look in your front porch and you'll see my name. So I said I'd like to show the house to a very qualified customer, Mr. and Mrs. Fountain. They'll be coming with their children at 2 o'clock this afternoon. So I then met the Fountains at the house, and of course I parked caddy corner from the house and told them to park caddy corner from the house because you see a better view of the home. We walked up the steps to the porch, and this was a classic Pittsburgh house at the time. Front porch, side entry hall, living room, dining room, kitchen, up the stairs, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath on the second floor, and the third floor had a full third floor with 2 bedrooms, but they weren't heated or air conditioned. They weren't heated, let's say, okay? Typical 5-bedroom Pittsburgh house. So I met the Karapopoulos, introduced the Karapopoulos to the Fountains, and I started to show them the house. So we went and showed the three rooms upstairs, downstairs, up the second floor, and then to the third floor. Then we went into the backyard of the house. I always like to end up in the backyard of the property so I can walk back into the kitchen. Usually the kitchen's the back of the house. Take a look at the backyard. We're staying in the snow. And when they ask this question, when you're outside, it's freezing weather. And you ask you the question, they asked the 3 questions. 3 questions that have always been asked. What do you think they'll take for the house? Okay. And I always give them a range, but I'll get back to that in a second. Then they say, how long has the house been on the market? And I said, well, the house has been on the market since August, and you have to have an answer why it's been on the market for 4 months and hasn't sold. So I gave them my answer is I was away in college in Cleveland, came back to Pittsburgh to sell the house this week, and wasn't able to sell it during the last 4 months. That's not a great excuse, but maybe the price has been reduced, et cetera, and it wasn't before. So your reasons why the house hasn't sold, but they want to know why the house hasn't sold. Okay, and they ask the big question is, why are the people moving? Because that was an easy answer because I knew they were moving to Baldwin. Okay, and back to the third and last question is, how much do you think they'll take? Okay, now this house is on the market at $14,900. Okay, $14,900. That's not the commission. That's not the transfer tax. That's the price of the house. 5-bedroom house, $14,900 at the time. I said earlier, this was a long, long time ago. So I explained to them at $14,900, included the closing costs, and we had a special financing package, which we did at the time, of only $200 down and finance 100% of the house. Okay, it was a special FHA program at the time, and they qualified for that, I believe. So they then said, well, we want to buy it. Okay? So I said, well, why don't we go down to the local coffee shop on 2nd Avenue and put the sales agreement together. Now at that time, this is going to be surprising because everybody's different who gets this, different states, but the sales agreement was a half page. It was called a short form agreement. Now, agreements usually are 16 pages, 12 pages, 18 pages, but this at the time was only a half page agreement and had the basics in the house: buyer and seller's name, address of the property, price, how much down payment, and how much mortgage they needed. So, very simple, but it was a long time ago, so we got longer agreements now. I took them back down to the local coffee shop called Joey's on 2nd. And a whole different story how Joey's boy played football, went to scholarship to the University of Washington, and their last name was Starbuck. But it's a whole different story, okay? So we get down, we order Cokes for everybody or coffee, where they wanted, and we put the sales agreement together. I showed them the closing cost sheet. I went through the agreement with them in detail. I always like to give the sales agreement nowadays. I give the sales agreement the first time I meet the people, give it to them ahead of time so they get a chance to review it and read it and go over that with them, as well as the closing cost. But this was a quick sale. So I then went we put the sales agreement together, and they were offering the $14,900, as I said, because the closing costs were included, et cetera. And I then decided, what should I do next? Well, I went to the payphone in the restaurant, went to the payphone, and I called the sellers, Mr. and Mrs. Kirapopoulos. And I said to Mr. and Mrs. Kirapopoulos, I think I'm going to have an offer on your home. Will you be there in the next half hour? I'd like to stop up and if I get it together, show it to you. Okay. I never believe in giving the number and the terms on the phone because it's a reaction, even though it's the asking price, a reaction for the sellers to say no, they want more money or for other reasons. So I like to always try to, and I know it's difficult in today's world, but to try to meet the people directly and present the offer. So half hour later, I go up to the house, I put the sales agreement, buy the people some more coffee. I said, stay right here. And Mrs. Fountain said to me, she said, can we go back to the house? Can we go back to the house today? Because it is Christmas Eve. And Mr. Fountain said, we really would like to stay there tonight and wake up in our new home for Christmas. Well, I said, well, kept that to myself. So I went back to the property, met the Kirapopoulos, showed them the agreement, showed them the closing cost sheet, whatever the terms, et cetera. They signed the sales agreement. And I said to them, would it be all right if the Fountains came back and re-looked at the house again? They're at the coffee shop, come back up and look at the house again and spend some time here. And Mrs. Kirapopoulos says to me, you're more than welcome to come back. And I cooked, tonight is not our Christmas Eve because we're Greek Orthodox, so it's 2 weeks from now. I'd be happy to have them have dinner because I'd made dinner tonight for my boys who I thought were coming here, so I got plenty of food. So I said, okay. So I went back to the coffee shop, gave them the sales agreement, shook the people's hands, shook Mr. and Mrs. Fountain's hand, congratulated them on the house. That's when you can shake hands then. Congratulated them on the house, and said to them, like I always say to every buyer when I bring our sales agreement back to them, give them the executed agreement. It's been great working with you all this time, 2 hours. It's great working with you. And would you remember me when it's time for you to sell this house and buy something else, buy a bigger house? And they always give you the word at that point. They always give you, because they're real excited, they always give you a word. So and sometimes word is better than written form because they'll come back to you. So I did it every time I sold a house to somebody. I asked them for the order again. It was time for them to move up or sell their house. So put the Karapapas back in my car. Put the fountains back in my car. We drove back up the hill, Elizabeth and Johnson, pulled in front of the house, catty cornered once again, and took them back up, reintroduced them to the folks, and they invited them for dinner at that point. So would you like to stay for dinner? And of course, people said yes. The fountain said yes, they'd love to have dinner. And a month later, we closed on the house. Okay? Now, the part of the story, the part of the Christmas story I don't know is, did the fountain stay in the third floor with a lot of blankets and things on the third floor that night for Christmas? Now, the miracle of Christmas is I believe to this day, I never asked, that the fountain stayed all night and woke up the next morning, on Christmas morning, in their new house with their family. So that's the sort of the moral of the story of this is a great time to be active in the market. Be active in the market because a lot of people want to buy houses. They want to buy houses and they want to sell houses during the month of December. And you're going to be the ones who are going to make those transactions because you value very much of the night before Christmas story, as well as the best holiday gift is a new home. So thank you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas season. Looking forward to seeing everybody, at least Zoom or Teams calls during the next couple weeks. Wishing everybody a great Christmas and holiday season. Thank you.